Let's get right into it now with the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Arizona. John Huppenthal is with us. Superintendent, thanks for being with us.
Well, glad to be here, Bill. Thank you for inviting me on.
There is a lot of confusion, and I think folks really are a little bit confused about your decision to hold the Tucson Unified School District in violation of the Arizona Statute 15-112. Explain your decision, if you would, Superintendent.
Well, I came into office on January 3rd, so we've had a time to reflect on what was going on, to look through the evidence that had been collected before I got here, to sort of categorize that evidence, and I made the decision to also to proceed forward with an audit. And we got the results back from that audit, and we read through that carefully and considered it as one part of a totality of evidence that we had, because we had a lot more evidence besides just the audit. And then we looked with particular interest in how the audit was conducted and the nature of the information that came back through the audit. So it was in the totality of the evidence that the declaration of violence or violation was made on 15-112. A couple of the key things that influenced my thinking in the audit, and these were facts that we could verify. The school board had failed to abide by their own policies about formal adoption of curriculum. And we thought that was particularly important, especially in this case, because of all the controversy. It is just logical that in this controversy, because the controversy is all about the curriculum, that you would take the large support staff. Mexican-American studies have a large support staff, very large support staff, that you would employ that large support staff and have them detail the curriculum. Now, curriculum's a fancy word. What you're talking about is week by week through the entire process. What is the student learning this week? What are they supposed to know? What kind of materials are coming into the classroom? What kind of books are coming into the classroom? You have that large support staff. They can detail that curriculum down so that it is transparent to parents, it's transparent to the citizens, it's transparent to the taxpayers, and then you, as a part of the curriculum development process, then you would present that to your parents, your taxpayers, and you invite public discussion of it. And that public input process might go back and forth as they look that over, and the citizens would talk about whether it's appropriate or not. By them violating their own board policy, they also violated state law on curriculum development.
Now, that was
a huge part of the whole thing, that this thing has gone on that long without them coming into compliance on curriculum development.
But what about the audit stating on page 50, during the curriculum audit period, no observable evidence was present to indicate that any classroom within TUSD is in direct violation of the law. In most cases, quite the opposite is true. And I think this is what has people here in Tucson confused. They read that sentence in the audit report, but then what you're ruling is in really a contradictory. There's a disconnect between the two.
Absolutely. And the thing that weighed heavily on our mind to set aside that observation was that the observation of what they observed in the classroom, two things. One, the Mexican-American studies knew that the audit would be taking place in that week. And the nature of an audit is you're supposed to define facts, and we have a lot of information that what was going on in Mexican-American studies did not match what they observed in that week. So that was what led us to set aside those observations as not being reliable for that week. But it was not just the difference between the materials we had otherwise collected It was the fact that there was no materials to back up their observations during that week.
You can understand.
Very limited materials to back up those observations.
Mr. Superintendent, you can understand why so many feel this is a political decision. After all, you sponsored the original legislation to ban Mexican-American studies, and of course you can't...
Oh, quite the contrary, Bill. I did not sponsor it.
Weren't you the original sponsor?
No, I was not. I did not sign on to that legislation.
Okay, but you did campaign certainly last year for school superintendent against the program, correct?
Yes, I expressed my concern during the campaign about what was going on in the classes.
Mm-hmm. So
and then we can elaborate on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
When I came into the classes, there was extensive references to a book by Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and so after I left the class, I went back and I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and there was not only references to that book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but there were references to other of Paulo Freire's books. And when I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and I got the impression from my visit into the class that Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire was a central guiding aspect of Mexican-American studies, that his philosophies and those readings were all a part of the framework by which Mexican-American studies was brought forth. And they were very straightforward about talking about Paulo Freire's stuff. So when I read through Paulo Freire's book, that's when my concerns really started to set in, because Paulo Freire is quite straightforward about it, that he was operating from a Marxist framework, that he was talking continuously about class struggle, and he was talking about operating from a concept of the Mexican Americans being an oppressed group. And when I was in class that day, the students around me talked about that concept of oppression. And we've seen references to students saying, I didn't know I was oppressed until I attended a Mexican-American studies class. So that mismatch again between the fact that all of the references to Paulo Freire were gone out of that week when the auditors came in was at odds with what we see. We see widespread, a lot of evidence that Paulo Freire's texts were, in a lot of different ways, are the guiding point for Mexican-American studies. And he talks in there about Che Guevara being in heroic terms in his book. And there was a poster of Che Guevara up on the wall when I went and visited the class. And in fact, Che Guevara helped direct the communist death camps in Cuba, where they put together what would be the equivalent of 3 million people in the United States being marched to the firing squads.
Superintendent,
we just had a lot of concerns, and we had materials that we observed.
Let's take a call, if you don't mind. This caller is David, and we're speaking of books. Go ahead, David.
I'm wondering, which books would you, John Huppenthal, like to see banned in high schools, and what will you do to ensure that they're forbidden in the classrooms? I'll take Nancy off the air.
Thank you, David. Go ahead, Superintendent.
Could you repeat the question?
It was about which books you would like to see banned in high schools.
Well, I don't know that I would like to see the book, even Paulo Freire's book, banned, but the problem I had with the book and how it was being used, I've sat down, I've read Pedagogy of the Oppressed myself, but I would never take it on in a spiritual sense and say, geez, I believe in this Marxist concept of class struggle and having kids identify with being oppressed, and having this sense of equality, but only equality in the concept that you are a member of an oppressed class, and so you're equal if other people are oppressed. but you have this sense of alienation with other people. So that's the concern that we had over how it was being used in the class.
Super.
And that whole concept of that. But it wasn't just that book. It was other books that as we looked at it, we go, wow, we don't see any kind of sense of balanced history. We don't see anything. This class is being used to meet state standards for American history. We don't see the aspects of this that would enable it to meet state standards for a history class. Just a lot of things that were of a concern.
Okay, we've got about a minute left. So the TUSD will appeal this. They have 60 days to come into compliance. Is that your understanding?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then what happens if they don't come into compliance? Well,
then, we're going to go to court. We will show them the evidence by which we made our filing, and then the court will either set aside the fines, or we will levy the fines at that date. And the fines are such that at that point, they will have to come into compliance. Now, the overwhelmingly obvious thing for them to do is to immediately start the hearings and to get their Mexican-American studies staff. They have a large staff, very large staff supporting these classes. Their curriculum should be mapped out almost at this point, after this much controversy, should almost be mapped out day by day. What are the students learning, and what are they required to know, and how does that correlate with state standards? And get into the hearing process where they can come to peace with their citizens, way past due for doing these kind of things, to comply with their own board policies, comply with state law, and put this issue behind them.
All right. Superintendent Huppenthal, thank you very much for being with us on the Buckmaster Show.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
lot.
Bill.
Thanks a lot.